Thanks so much for being here, gang.
Right. Okay, are we on? Okay. Hag Sameach. Hey, hello Zoomers. Shlomo Zukir, a scholar of ancient Judaism, writes about today, Erev Shavuot, and the tradition of studying all night. The goal of Shavuot night is not Torah learning. One can study Torah any day of the year. The goal is to experience something of the radical encounter with God at Sinai. In the Torah's telling, the encounter with God was an immersive experience, as if attending a concert with overwhelming audio-visual components. And the people are at first entranced and then overwhelmed by what they're experiencing, backtracking in fear. They're so overpowered, they're unable to be able to distinguish between the senses. Hence, they saw the sound of the shofar. They were overawed by all of this, and they begged off, asking to have Moses serve as an intermediary rather than encounter God directly. This should not be surprising. It makes sense that an encounter with God should be overwhelming, an experience that scrambles the senses and shifts one's consciousness. And that's what we're looking for on Shavuot. Tikkun Leil Shavuot isn't primarily an opportunity to learn. It is meant precisely to stimulate that total immersive experience. We do that by occupying ourselves entirely with Torah and nothing else. Okay, maybe some cheesecake. He continues, we learn until it hurts, going at it until we just can't anymore. Depriving of ourselves of sleep brings our bodies into the experience and inevitably affects a shift in consciousness. Taken together, this practice creates an intense experience and all-encompassing engagement with God and Torah, just as the Israelites experienced at Mount Sinai. Yes, you might have a headache in the morning, but some hangovers are worth it. I thought that was an amazing write-up. So with that, here we go. We are not going to go all night. We're just going to go for a little while together here now. And you are welcome to continuing studying at home all night, if you like, as late and as caffeinated as you like. And milkshakes await those of us here in person after our time of learning. I'm so grateful to have Cantor Randall Miller and Magid storyteller Marty Tobin and Emily Simon teaching with me tonight. We are very blessed. So I know that the sun is not set yet, but I want to light us some candles because, as Steve said, it's dark somewhere. And so we're going to bring in Shavuot with the candles, and those candles will be burning when the sun eventually does set. So let's take a moment by the candles. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel yom tov. Hag Sameach. So we begin tonight with Cantor Randall sharing some words about Kabbalah and Shavuot, the 4 worlds and the 10 Sfirot.
Shalom, my friends. Chag Sameach. Here we are again at Sinai together to relive once again, to re-experience the revelation and the amazement of that time. And I'd like to start at the beginning of time. Long time ago, before there were any people, before the earth was here, before the universe was here, before time and space were here. I want to go back all the way to the beginning, when the only thing in the universe, there wasn't even a universe, but there was this Ein Sof, an unknowable everything, a mystery, omniscient, omnipotent. It contained all of all because there was nothing else. One day, the divine was wanting to give the goodness that the God felt, but there wasn't anybody to give it to. There was no place to give it. Everything was God. And so, one of the legends has that God had to make a space to create a universe. And so what God did was God did this contraction called Tzimtzum. And God withdrew God's self from somewhere. And there was nothing there, so that a universe could be created. Well, now the question arises, how does God create this universe? How does God set things spinning? How do we end up here at all? The Kabbalists had an idea. They had a picture. And it went something like this: that God could emanate this supernal light. And this light wasn't just light as we know light. It was much more than that. It was energy, it was goodness, it was all of the feelings, everything that it would take to create a universe. And God wanted to emit this light into the space created for the universe. And so just as when we take white light and shine it through a prism, that white light breaks into all the colors of the spectrum. And each color is unique. Each color touches us in a different way. And so too with the supernal light. And so as God would give this light into this space, all of the energy, all of the emotions, everything that we would need to create a world, it was refracted into a number of different beautiful bands. And so, in a sense, the same way that our body is connected to our soul, God created what were called channels, areas of flow, Sefirot, emanations. All of these words work a little bit because none of them really work well enough, because all of this is really quite beyond words. But as the Kabbalists explained this light was broken up, this supernal light that had everything in it was broken up into 10 different channels, 10 different emanations. And these emanations brought that warmth of flow from the Godhead, from the divine, from the source to this area. Now, these are often depicted here as circles. And I'd like to spend a little bit of time sharing with you a little bit about these circles, because they really do have something to do with Shavuot. We imagine that here at the deepest point is where the emanation is coming from. We see these have names, these circles. These names depict potencies. They depict different kind of character, different kind of what is the nature of the stuff, that is in this particular channel. And we can't think of the channels as pipes. That's much too physical. But pathways of flow. And so the top one was called Keter. Keter means crown. Has many other words associated with it. Was thought about this as the mysterious, the place where God came from. This was, I am that I am. This is Yud He Vav He above this. And it enters this flow through Keter. Well, also near the top are Bina and Chokhmah. Two more of these Sefirot. And one Chokhmah kind of meant the deepest of wisdom, the rules that the universe worked by, the essence of revelation was in Chokhmah. And in Bina was more like understanding or intellect or the ability to appreciate and understand the meaning of the wisdom. And these three Sefirot, being very, very close to the Godhead, were very much veiled from us. And so it was very difficult for us to penetrate these veils, to appreciate the heights, if you will, of Keter, Chokhmah, and Bina. Well, below that, there were 7 more Sefirot. Okay? These were called the lower Sefirot, and those were things that made up who we are. Chesed, loving kindness, really, really important thing that guides much of our lives. And opposite chesed would be deen or justice or gevura. Okay? Now, let me say that each of these Sefirot have many different names. They have many different essences. Their potency is unique, however, for each one. But though their potency is unique, their potential is infinite because it comes from the source. And from the source, there is no end. And so, these are laid out in this way because the Kabbalists believed that there was balance between these two, a right side and a left side. And you know, if we have too much chesed, too much loving kindness without any boundaries, we can get into some trouble. And so there has to be some balance there. And beneath there's Hod and Netzach on either side. And Hod was kind of like a splendor, glory. And Netzach was like victory. And again, these words only approach the meaning of these Sefirot. But all of these exhibited balance. And they didn't emanate from God and remain in these channels, but they began to move and blend so that you'd get blendings of these different Sefirot that would make up the essence of all of our lives, the way that we live them, the feelings that we have, the love that emanates from us, the fear of doing something. All of these came from blending of the different Sefirot. 3 above, 7 below. Down at the bottom, you can see here is Shekhinah. Shekhinah was the embodiment of God within the earth, the feminine aspect of God. Whereas Keter, the crown, may have been the masculine, opposite that was the feminine. And all of these ideas were blended into these Sefirot. Well, the story goes that as this supernal light was emanating into this vast place that was to become the universe couldn't contain it. It was too great. It was too amazing. Initially, there were what were called klipot, vessels of some sort, to receive these emanations. But the klipot couldn't hold the essence of these potentials. And so the klipot broke. And all of these energies, all of this potential spilled out all about in the universe. Many, many of those sparks of the divine were hidden within shards within this universe. The Kabbalists, a group of Jewish ascetics who lived in Sfat, in what is now Eretz Yisrael, and they in the 16th century. And they, at that time, were receiving knowledge from ancient texts. And there were a number of ancient texts that early Kabbalah, there was one called Sefer Yetzirah, another called Sefer, is it Baha'i? Yeah, Bahir, thank you, Esther. And from these early texts, they got additional information and began to take this information and form it into these stories, into this mythology that would help them in their meditation, help them in their approach to God, in their devakut, in their joining in union with God. Well, in 1534, there was a fellow by the name of Rabbi Isaac Luria, who was born in Jerusalem, spent some of his time in Inquisition Spain, and then was called and went to Sfat. He was felt to be very brilliant and very quickly became the leader of this group of Kabbalists. Okay? And the word Kabbalah means tradition. And so what they were doing is they were trying to gain as much knowledge as they could of the tradition to be able to approach getting closer with the divine. One of the things that Isaac Luria talked about was the idea of tikkun, which has become quite an important idea in our lives today, the idea of tikkun olam, of healing the world. And Luria would imagine that our job was to go out into the world and find the sparks, and gather them up, repair the world in that way. It certainly has come to have a lot of meaning in our time. We talk about tikkun olam and making things better in the world, and talking about whether it be global warming or whether it be the love between one person and another. There's a lot of healing to do. The other thing that the Kabbalists did is they got information from what was called Sefer Yetzirah. And Sefer Yetzirah was one of the earliest works of Jewish mysticism. It's said to have come from Avraham Avinu. Okay, that the knowledge that God gave this knowledge to Avraham, and Avraham passed it down. Okay. And within the Sefer Yetzirah is a description of what's in the Torah. But it's a description on a different level. So we look at the Torah and we see words. We see letters. Sefer Yetzirah tells us that the universe was created with 32 paths of wisdom. And of these 32 paths of wisdom, 22 were letters and 10 were numbers. That the entire world could be created in this way. From these 10 numbers and 22 letters, this is what we get in the Torah. We get the letters, and according to the Kabbalists, the numbers are these spheres, are these sphirot, these pathways. We only draw them as spheres. They are bound, they're emanations, they're unique potentialities that are flowing into this world. And through Sefer Yetzirah, they began to try to understand the cryptic building blocks of the universe, and introduce these sphirot of divine realms and focus our attention on space, time, and soul. Well, how do we interact with these sphirot? How do they affect us in our life? Well, the Kabbalists found the idea of 4 levels. The place where we're most familiar with is called the world of Asiyah, the world of things, the world of action, okay, where tables exist. There is time, there is space, and there is consciousness, ours. Okay? But that's not all who we are. We have emotions, for instance. Oftentimes I feel like we're really emotional people that are being carried around in bodies. You know, it's our emotions that really construct our days, you know. The feelings that we have, the love that we express for our family, for our community, the anger that we may feel when we turn on the news or look at smoke rising on the hillside or whatever. And so not only are we in existence in the world of action, which we understand, we can see it, but also a little bit closer to the divine is this world of emotion, which was called Yetzirah. But that's not all. What about when a musician plays something that didn't ever exist before? Or an artist paints a picture? That's something more yet than physicality or emotion. That is kind of creativity. That's a little bit of what God's stuff is. And so in that world that we're existing with, at the same time, we get creative thoughts, arranging of flowers, playing the piano, all types of creation of everything that we see, of the wonderful, wonderful things that we've learned in this world. All of that comes out of the world of Bria. Now, though I'm talking as if God is up here and we're down here, you can also think of it as inward and outward. There really is no directionality except to say that as you ascend through these worlds, all of which are part of us, that we get closer and closer to the divine. And the 4th level was called Atzilut, which kind of meant the spiritual world, the hidden worlds. And so that we, in fact, live in all of these worlds. And each world is populated in the same kind of way. Each world has time, place, and some type of being or consciousness. Often these different worlds are called mansions. There's different language that the Kabbalists invented because our language really wasn't complete enough, and it isn't complete enough now to really appreciate how this works. But you can imagine that as the emanation is flowing down through its different potentialities of the Sefirot and blending as it goes, it passes through these different levels of world. And it affects our creativity. It affects our emotionality. It affects our physical world. Interestingly, not only does the flow come in one direction, but the flow also goes in the other direction. Our actions influence these channels of potentiality. Anger is going to make different effects on different parts of this system of flow, this system of energy. One way to think about it is, all the atoms that make up our entire universe are all made out of protons and neutrons and electrons. They're all made out of the same stuff. And yet, in different combinations, it comes out to be 102 or however many elements that make up the entire physical universe that we know. So you can imagine that instead of electrons and neutrons and protons, there is this energy that is flowing through these different channels and impacting the different worlds as it works its way towards us, and then as our energy works its way back up. The Kabbalists believe that this is how the world works. That the Big Bang, if you will, that's described in science, may very well have been what fits with the klipot, breaking and exploding, and all this supernal light spreading out all over the universe, which is exactly what our physical universe is doing since the Big Bang. It's been expanding, it's been going out to fill this infinite universe that God had done tzimtzum to create. The Kabbalists are one of the schools of thought within Judaism. And you know, in different schools of thought, there are different ways of looking at the divine. Often, you know, in the Torah, the divine was often very anthropomorphized. It was looked as a king on a throne, perhaps. Well, that was only one way of looking at God. In the Reconstructionist manner, we may imagine God as being the love or the energy between us, a disembodied, if you will, or a naturalistic God rather than a supernaturalistic God. And so the Kabbalists were only one school of thought. And they haven't even been around that long. They were in the 16th century. That was a whole long time after Bible times. You know, it was a whole long time after Abraham. And so their energy and their feeling and their thought, however, has filtered into our Judaism today. The whole idea of there being this mystical world where there are angels, where there are seraphim, where there are holy angels that are lifting up and saying, Kadosh, 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 to the Holy One. That filters into our services. Kabbalat Shabbat, the evening service that precedes Mariv on Friday night, comes from the Kabbalists. When we say the Kedusha, and we stand up on our toes to get near to the angels, and we say Kadosh, 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 okay, that comes from the Kabbalists as well. In the Torah, in Leviticus, about a couple of weeks ago, we were given a commandment that said that from the time, the second day of Pesach, until Shavuot, we were supposed to count the days. We weren't really told what we were supposed to count. But we were told we were supposed to count from the barley harvest to the wheat harvest. Now, in those days, barley was a food crop that was fed mostly to animals. It was also the first grain that would come to harvest in the Holy Land. And so we had special sacrifices that we offered to God in thanks for the barley harvest. 7 weeks later, we began to receive the wheat harvest. And so we were told to count for those 7 weeks. And the wheat harvest, the wheat was essential for our well-being. It was the basic foodstuff that we lived on. It was what we made our challah out of when we co-created with God to make the challah. And so we did sacrifices for the barley, which was associated with Pesach, which was associated with our physical liberation from Egypt. And on the other end, we have Shavuot, okay? 7 weeks later, also called the Feast of Weeks, also called Yom HaBikurim, first fruits. At that time, we were also told we need to give a sacrifice on that 50th day. And the wheat was looked at more as a spiritual thing, whereas the barley fed the animals, the wheat fed the people. The barley was looked at as much more the physical expression of our leaving Egypt. But the wheat harvest, feeding us, was looked at as a much more spiritual time in which we celebrated in the receiving of the Torah. Well, what are we supposed to do during these weeks, during this time of counting? According to the Torah, we're simply supposed to count the days, 7 weeks. Okay? And 7 weeks of 7 days. Very powerful numbers within the Jewish Torah. The Kabbalists had this great idea. Why don't we take these 7 sfirot, the 7 lower sfirot, the ones that we can appreciate, the ones that are not so veiled that we can't get near them. Let's take the loving kindness. Let's take the deen, the justice. Let's take the victory. Let's take all of these different potentialities and label each week with one of these 7. And in that week, let us spend time thinking about that aspect of ourselves in a way to help prepare ourselves to receive Torah once again as we approach Shavuot. And then within each week, what if we assign each day one of those 7 lower sfirot? And so in the first week, for instance, a week of chesed. In a week of chesed, it's about love. We may combine that with each of the other 7 sfirot and give us 2 potentialities to look at together and reflect on and meditate on and think about ourselves. And each day would change, and we'd look at 2 more potentialities. Throughout the 7 weeks, it gave us 49 days of preparation to receive Torah. Now, as we know, people receive Torah at the level that they're able to receive it. Each year when we come around to Shavuot, one more time, we receive different Torah than we might have last year. We're at a different place. Our world is at a different place. Our lives are at a different place. And so, what one is supposed to receive on Shavuot is really dependent on all of these factors interacting to bring us to that point. But the idea of reflecting on these different sphirot, on these different potentialities, which are the energy that make up our universe, is one way, is what we often do. In our time now, there are little books. This one is written by Rabbi Yael Levi. And for each day, for instance, today until it's the sunset, this is the 49th day, right? So on the 49th day, we've worked our way all the way to the one closest to us, which is Shekhinah, okay, which is also called Malchut, okay? And we've worked our way through the 7 days. So here on the 49th day, just as an example, we are at what might be called Shekhinah Sheba Shekhinah, or Shekhinah Sheba Malchut, the divine presence within majesty. So what this rabbi has done for us is given us a little poem and given us a little piece of scripture from Psalms to reflect on during that day. Each day is different. Each day is called by those two potentialities. Day 19 was Hod Sheba Tiferet, being within beauty. Okay? Now, this is just one example. You can get apps on your iPhone to help count the Omer. Okay? There are all different methods of doing this. And it really doesn't matter. It's one approach to Devakut. It's one approach to getting closer to God. It's one approach to making the most out of this wonderful opportunity that we have to relive and re-experience in all worlds being back at Sinai again. And where this came from was it came from this group of ascetics in the 16th century who has infused our learning, our teaching, our liturgy, and our understanding of the world. Okay? They took this from Jewish texts, from the Torah, and from meditating on all of these things and beginning different techniques of practice, they've brought this to our time. And so, while we may not think of ourselves so much as Kabbalists, at least now, when we count the Omer, and you hear Shekhinah Sheba Malchut, and you hear this is day 49, at least now you'll have an idea of a little bit of the mystical origins of where this all came from. Thank you.
Yasher koach. Thank you. So Cantor Randall mentioned this idea of space, time, and soul. And there's some words for that in Kabbalistic tradition. Olam means the world, the space we live in. Shana is an hour. It is representative of time. And the word nefesh means soul. So there's a song that a friend of ours composed with some friends about Har Sinai, being on the mountain, Mount Sinai. And it takes these words from Exodus 19:18. This is on your song sheet. And Mount Sinai was smoking everywhere. V'har Sinai Ashan Kulo. And that third word, Ashan, which means smoke, has 3 letters in it, Ayin, Shin, and Nun. And Ayin is the first letter of Olam. And Shin is the first letter of Shana. And Nun is the first letter of Nefesh. So when they read the text from Torah about the moment of revelation, when God gave Torah to the people, when Torah was revealed, when God was revealed to the people on Shavuot, there is this word, V'har Sinai Ashan Kulo, and on the mountain there was a cloud everywhere, smoking everywhere. That word Ashan means there was time, space, and soul everywhere. And so this chant was created about that. It goes like this. V'har Sinai Ashan Kulo, Ashan Kulo, V'har Sinai Ashan Kulo, Ashan Kulo, V'har Sinai Ashan Kulo, Ashan Kulo. And then here's the next part. Olam Shana Nefesh, Olam Shana Nefesh. You want to try that? Olam Shana Nefesh, Olam Shana Nefesh, V'har Sinai Ashan Kulo, Ashan Kulo, V'har Sinai Ashan Kulo, Ashan Kulo, Olam Shana Nefesh, Olam Shana Nefesh, Olam Shana Nefesh, Olam Shana Nefesh. And Mount Sinai was smoking everywhere, and holiness was expressed as holy space, as sacred time, and embodied soul. Our next teaching will be by me, and it connects to this moment on Har Sinai, this moment of revelation. I was planning to speak today about the relevance of revelation, of meeting the divine and receiving God on Har Sinai, on Mount Sinai. And I was looking back through all my notes of prior years, and I found that 2 years ago I gave a teaching on Shavuot on Revelation, and I completely forgot. So I'm not going to do the same teaching. I'll do something a little bit different. But on that day, I talked about Revelation in its historical context and how we might think about it now. I talked about God being revealed on Mount Sinai and the varying theologies of how God may be revealed to us in our lives. And I talked about Torah being revealed, given, gifted on Mount Sinai then, and how Torah today can be a pathway to have God revealed to us as we study each day, each week, each year. So tonight I still want to talk about Revelation, as I said, and I want to talk about the God part, but I want to look at it in a slightly different way. So this handout is the one that says Revelation, the ideas of Devekut and Shiviti. And Cantor Randall mentioned Dvekut, and we're going to really get into that tonight. So we want to just look at the moments in Torah where this moment of revelation happened. And the first is that I want to speak about is from Exodus 20:15. And it says, all the people witnessed the thunder and lightning, the blare of the horn, the shofar, and the mountain was smoking. There's that Ashan again. And when the people saw it, they fell back and stood at a distance. So some things to point out about this text. It says all the people witnessed the revelation. Nobody's eyes were closed. Nobody was hiding. Nobody didn't see it. The other thing to notice is God is very much being expressed here in a natural wonder, in through the horn of an animal that is breathed by a human, this aspect of breath and this instrument, and also in the smoke. So there's this natural place in which God is moving through and connecting, making the connection. We also can see that the people did not want to be too close. It was overwhelming, and this connects to that opening quote I read at the beginning, that this experience of revelation was an overwhelming one. That it was a radical encounter with God. The next quote I want to look at comes from Deuteronomy chapter 5, verses 2 through 4. Ah, you found him. Yay, I'm so happy. Good. Oh, good. I'm so glad. Okay. Someone just found lost and found items. It's very exciting. Deuteronomy 5, it says, so Deuteronomy is at the end of Torah, the last book of Torah. Our God Adonai made a covenant with us at Horeb. Horeb is another one of the names for Mount Sinai. They had two names. Just like in Alaska, we have Denali and Mount McKinley. I'm from Alaska, so too Sinai, Horeb. It was not with our ancestors that Adonai made this covenant, this pact, this promise, but with us, the living, every one of us who is here today, face to face, Adonai spoke to you on the mountain out of the fire. So some notes about this text. This is a retelling in the beyond the actual moment of what happened back then when we were standing there. This is farther ahead in time, and Moses is talking to the people and saying, God spoke to us on the mountain, not our ancestors, us, even though their ancestors may not have been alive anymore. It also says that this covenant, this agreement of partnership, was not given to the fathers and mothers, but given to us. Here, looking back on it, every one of us. The implication is that even after the fact, it is still here for us today. God, knowing God, this God encounter can happen right now for us. We also see again, God was in the fire, in this thing of nature, and face to face, Adonai, God spoke. It was very up close and personal. So the holiday of Shavuot is about just this. It's about that moment on the mountain, on Behar Sinai, and what happened there, this moment of intense revelation. We know the symbol of the Magen David, the six-pointed star on our flag, the flag of Israel around my neck. These 6 points, some say, stand for humanity, the whole world, and God. Those are the first 3. And the second 3 are creation, redemption, the freedom of slavery, and revelation, Clearly, beyond the holiday of Shavuot, and when we read it in our Torah that talks about revelation, the idea of revelation is part of this symbol that so many of us hold right next to our hearts. It is so central to Judaism. So today I want to lift up two ideas. There are more, but just two ideas in Judaism that connect to revelation, this intense knowing of God, and about how connectedness to God might be experienced and relevant in our lives, and how we might or might not have radical or not so radical encounters with God in our lives. The two aspects are dveikut, this concept that Cantor Randall was talking about. It literally means cleaving, clinging, hugging, embracing, entanglement with the divine. The other concept is shiviti. It comes from this saying, Shiviti Adonai, or Shiviti Hashem lenegdi tamid. It is a practice of placing the idea of God, God's name, Yud He Vav He, before us always. As we explore these two topics, we get to ask ourselves, I'm going to take us through them, is any of this relevant to us? This idea of dveikut and this idea of shiviti, clinging, cleaving to God, or placing God before us always. Do we have a deep connection or a sense of it, or a yearning of God all the time? Do we put God, or whatever God means for us, our highest intentions, our sense of our place in the universe, do we put that before us always, always, always? Maybe we do. And maybe we are humanist Jews, which is very similar to Reconstructionist Jews, who celebrate Jewish life while foregoing appeals for divine intervention, who instead put faith in human reason and power as the best vehicles to improve the world, to achieve tikkun olam. Maybe some of us are agnostic and believe that nothing is known or can be known of the existence or nature of God, which is, in a way, when you are speaking about Kabbalah, it's dizzying. It makes one think we cannot even possibly know. You even said that there's an aspect of not knowing. But maybe that's we're agnostic. We think that there's something, but we don't necessarily believe in it or not believe in it. And maybe some of us are atheists who disbelieve or lack a belief in the existence of God or gods. But wherever we are, whatever we believe, whoever we are still Jewish, or on the path of becoming Jewish or exploring Judaism, or are partners with someone who are Jewish. So how can this core revelation-connected idea of dveikut, clinging to God, and shiviti, placing God before us always, in Judaism be a part of our everyday Jewish lives in this day and age, who we are with our sensibilities, our theologies, and beliefs? So we're going to look at some quotes about these topics and then have an opportunity to reflect on their relevance or applicability to our lives, or not. So we're going to turn to dveikut. The first quote is from Deuteronomy 10:20. So in our Torah, again near the end of Torah. It says, "You must revere God. Only your God shall you worship. To God shall you hold fast, and by God's name shall you swear." And on the sheet here, I kind of bolded the letters, the words that relate to dveikut. So in the Hebrew, it says tid bak. It's the same root as dveikut. It means to cling. So you must revere God. Only God shall you worship. You shall hold fast. You shall cleave. And by God's name you shall swear. So that the thing to note about this text is it is a commandment to us to cleave to God, to cling to God. Okay. Moving a little farther into Deuteronomy, it comes up again. Deuteronomy 13:5. It says, "It is your God, Yud-He Vav-He, alone whom you should follow, whom you should revere, whose commandments you should observe, whose orders you should heed, whom you should worship, and to whom you should hold fast." Again, we have that same word, tidbakun. And again, we see that this is a commandment. We shall hold fast. Then we go to Deuteronomy 30, chapter verses 19 through 20. It says, "I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day. I have put before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life if you and your offspring would live, by loving your God, Adonai, heeding God's commands, and holding fast to God, cleaving to God. For thereby you shall have life, and shall long endure upon the soil that Adonai swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give to them." So again, notes about this text is it's saying that if we cleave to God, if we do practice this dveikut, it's a pretty good idea because it is the path towards life. It is the path of choosing life. The alternative is death. And there's a whole section about this, and there's lots of curses if we don't choose life. The dveikut is one of the things we should definitely be choosing, says Deuteronomy. All right, so next we have a longer quote from Psalms. And as I'm moving through these, I just kind of want you to know that these quotes, all of them that I'm reading, become kind of the proof texts in our tradition that really everything is going to come back to these four texts and talking about this is how we know that this is a central thing we are to do in our lives. So I think if we were sitting around a table in a circle, I might have us take turns reading these. But for the simplicity of the multimedia approach, I'm going to keep reading. I hope that's okay. So this is Psalm 63, which says, "God, you are my God. I search for you. My soul thirsts for you. My body yearns for you, as a parched and thirsty land that has no water. I shall behold you in the sanctuary and see your might and glory. Truly your faithfulness is better than life. My lips declare your praise. I bless you all my life. I lift up my hands, invoking your name. I am sated as with a rich feast. I sing praises with joyful lips. When I call you to mind upon my bed, when I think of you in the watches of the night, for you are my help, and in the shadow of your wings I shout for joy. My soul is attached to you." Dveikut. Your right hand supports me. Isn't that beautiful? So I just wonder, does anyone relate to that psalm? You can show it, raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. And any of our Zoomers, if it relates to any of you. Oh, Georgia, I see your hand. Is that Dana? Yeah. I think it's Dana. Oh, yes, it was Georgia too. Okay. I thought Dana was Georgia, but yes, I was right to think that. Great. So we may not all relate to that, but it's beautiful nonetheless. All right, so now we're going to turn to a more modern text, Mesilat Yesharim, which some of you may be familiar with, if those of you who are Musarniks, those studiers of Musar. This text says, the Torah exhorts us many times on the clinging to God, on devekut, to love the Lord your God and to cling to him, quoting Deuteronomy 30 that we read. To him you shall cling, quoting Deuteronomy 20 that we read. And David said, my soul clings to you, quoting the psalm we just read. All these verses speak to one matter, namely the clinging with which a man clings to God, blessed be God, to such an extent that this man or woman is unable to part or move from God. So some things to point out here is clinging to God is crucial and crucial to the practice of Musar. And it brings up a question as we begin to start to think about how might this be relatable to our lives, is to ask the question, to what do we cling? And this is a place that if someone wanted to share something, we have microphones or unmuting capabilities on Zoom. So if anybody has something they might want to share about what they cling to, or you can just think on it.
Julie.
Yes, Dana.
This is Dana. It's the voice from Zoom.
Yay.
I think of God as nature. And so when I was listening to every part that you read, it just really came to me that we must consider ourselves to be part of nature. Otherwise, we can't survive. And so what I cling to in God, in quotes, is that I'm an inseparable part of nature, as are rocks and trees and rivers and birds, anything that you can imagine. And it's humbling, and it's very important in terms of how I live on this earth and how I treat this earth, because it's integral to who I am. So that's what I've got.
Yasher koach. Amen to that. Yeah. I can really relate to that, Dana, myself. Hence why I want to spend Shavuot hiking on a mountain in nature tomorrow with any who will join me. Hint, hint. Yeah. Oh, Carol, I'm going to bring you a microphone.
Then it occurs to me that how do you distinguish between pantheism and that God resides in nature and that you are part of it without being pantheistic?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it all right to be pantheistic?
Yeah. It's a good question. Well, some would say that the whole thing that Cantor Randall was just speaking about is this idea that, God is in these many different emanations in these different places. God is this, and God is this, and God is this, and there's this sort of multiplicity of the Godhead. And one teacher I had in rabbinical school said that Kabbalah formed in the aftermath of Christianity. And part of what Christianity did is gave Christians, people who chose that path, some diversity of things to hold on to, like the Father, the Spirit, right? Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, but then there's also Mary. There's a strong woman in there too, right? And so there's that in Kabbalah, these different emanations allowed for some diversity, and also this idea of these different levels, of these different places where we might grab onto God, and recognizing that we all have also different ideas and theologies, and we find God in different places. And so, I don't know. So there's just a whole lot going on in.
Well, Shintoism also finds that the kami, or God, resides in nature, and every single leaf or tree or rock or has God in it. And so how do we distinguish between that, or do we even distinguish between that?
Right.
How do we not consider that idolatry to some extent?
Right. It's a careful line to walk. Do you want to hand it to Esther? Right? Yeah. Did you want to respond to that, or?
Yeah, I have. So what I would say is that one really famous, it's debated whether he was a pantheist or what's called a panentheist. Everything is God, and then there's more to God than everything. But was Baruch Spinoza, who lived in. He was a Sephardic Jew living in the Netherlands, and he was therefore influenced by Kabbalah, even if he sort of rejected a lot of the literalist interpretation of the Torah and the authorship of the Zohar and stuff like that. There was still this idea with him that everything in the universe, if we look at it and if we conceptualize it as a totality, that is what God is. So I think, and he did get a cut off from his Jewish community. He got a cherem against him, but so did Mordecai Kaplan.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think and oh, sorry, did you have? Yeah, another thing I was gonna say is that, like, before I started really my journey into Judaism, I was thinking about I was like thinking very vaguely about God, and I was troubled by this problem of suffering, and then I just kind of saw a butterfly, and I said, "Thank you, God, for the butterfly." And I think to some extent, I think just seeing a butterfly and recognizing God in that can be clinging to God even when there's all this troubling stuff. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We gotta. Let's have a microphone, because no one on Zoom can hear you otherwise. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's also that example that Esther shared, is putting God before you too, because you're choosing to see God, and you're choosing that butterfly is a sign for you, that's a blessing for you.
Yeah.
And that reminds me, that kind of ties into what I was thinking of, is there are things that I cling to that are holy, like family or like my self-care or whatever, and but there are things that I cling to that are not like healthy, and they're not God or good. And so that I think that's also helpful, that whatever we place before us, whatever we focus on, that to choose things, that to cling to things and to put things before us that are in alignment with spirituality and just like goodness.
Amen. Thank you. And this will be our last comment for this round.
In response to Carol, I would say that we see the things in the world. We don't worship the things in the world. We see them, we experience them. But what we're taught is all is one, that God is one. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. And so I believe that that from our teachings, we know that all that we see comes from God, that it is embodied by God. And so I think the difference between pantheism and monotheism has to do with where that godness is. And so to me, from my faith, from my teaching, I believe that God is one and created all of this. These are all manifestations of God, just like we are manifestations of God. And I don't place my worship there. I look at the wonderful bouquet of flowers that God creates for us every day, and my thought is to God, not to the flowers. I think that it's from our teaching that helps us put what we observe into context.
Thank you. You could just hold on to that, but just mute it, and then, because we might need it again. Thank you so much. And I think the thing is like, as I was naming in the beginning, we might be agnostic or atheist or humanist. I mean, there's also a lot of different ways that people think about God. We might be Kabbalist. We might be Musar, maybe really the path that we find God in, being in service to the other and lessening the suffering of others. For others of us, we really study Torah. Others of us were activists. And I mean, there's so many different ways that we sort of engage with this project of Judaism and worship and alignment with the divine. And we have different theologies, each of us. And I was just trying to figure it out. But it is that sort of question: is when does it start being what it shouldn't? And I like what you said, Sasha, about like are we clinging to the right things, right? And so, the Shema and all the warnings not to do idol worshiping, and what is that? The source now is beginning to be questionable. I always attribute it to Arthur Waskow, but I think it went before him to a rabbi who just passed away, whose name is escaping me in this moment. But that the Shema, what it's really talking about, and Reb Zalman does this amazing translation of it, is that we should not worship power and rushing and our jobs and, promotions and the things, the phone, consumption, oil, right? That those are actually pharaohs and slave masters. They are not the true God. And so, you wanted to say one more thing? Okay, Randall, could you pass to Dana, please? She's sitting in this next row. Press the button. You just kind of hold it right up to
I
you.
think in the mystical tradition, there's a precedent for communing with nature. That's really very present. The Nachman of Breslov.
Yes.
I have a little teaching that I keep on my refrigerator about help me to be alone and go out into nature and speak to God. And that is a meaningful path for me, as other people have spoken to that too. So I think it's a very legitimate precedent of finding God in nature, and I don't think it's, as I agree with you, it's not, that isn't the danger of idolatry. The danger of idolatry is going after the prestige and money and status and all of the things that are take us off the spiritual path, but not nature.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's just what I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add from the very beginning here the idea of we and connectedness. And as we talk about relationship to nature, source of all nature, it's we together that need to be able to have that connection also. Otherwise, why do we need balance? Why do we need to worry about power or not power? It's because we're all part of all these channels that you have described.
Thank you. If you just push that button, it'll kind of, yeah. Oh. Thank you. Yeah. And that balance, too, it connects back to what Cantor Randall was speaking about the four worlds. And like if we're all in one, all the rest are getting negated, right? If I'm only in Bria, I'm only in the head of creativity and thinking and analyzing, which is a place where I happen to, honestly, like I'm very much in that world. I need to remember, oh yeah, body, feed the body. Oh yes, heart, like pick up the phone and call that friend. And oh spirit, have time to like, for me, as many of you may have heard, like being with my cat is a deeply spiritual experience. So I need to make sure I take time to pet my cat or a dog, right? So, get into that place of a balance, because if we're not in balance, then things start to go, can start getting wrong. And we could even end up worshiping one of the worlds, but that's not what was intended. It's supposed to be all the things, the balance. And that image of the Sefirot is a balanced one. It has symmetry. That's part of so much of that teaching, the wholeness. Yeah. All right, so I'm probably going to eclipse some of my, I have three more quotes. I'm going to move quickly because it's just, there's so much here. But the Talmud talks about Devekut. It says in Ketuvim, on a similar note, you say that the verse states to love the Lord your God, to hearken to his voice, and to cleave to him in Deuteronomy 30. But is it possible for a person to cleave to the divine presence? Rather, anyone who marries his daughter to a Torah scholar, and one who conducts business on behalf of Torah scholars, and one who utilizes his wealth to benefit Torah scholars with his property, the verse ascribes him credit as though he is cleaving to the divine presence. All right, so this quote's a little like, but for our modern sensibilities. But I do love that the Torah asks the question, is it possible to cleave to the divine presence? And the Talmud is trying to figure out, how do you actually do that? And they came up with an idea that anything that has to do with Torah scholarship and anything in support of Torah scholarship is the act of cleaving to God, right? In essence, when we had revelation at Mount Sinai, we had two things were revealed to us, God and Torah, both together all at once. And studying Torah is a way to connect us to God. But it is really, this interesting question is, can we actually cleave to God? And that one of the things that the Sefirot offers us, one of the things that nature offers us, one of the things that butterfly offers us, or the walk on the way here offers us, or my cat offers us, is these other ways to find God, because God is this really mysterious, big and powerful, and maybe completely overwhelming and terrifying thing that is hard to find, right? So these are ways we can touch in. All right, moving on to the concept of Shaviti. It's all entirely connected. This idea comes from Psalms, verse 16. Shaviti Adonai lenegdi tamid. I am ever mindful of the Lord's presence, or I place God before me always. God is at my right hand. I shall never be shaken. So what people do with this phrase is they actually write the word Shaviti and this whole text on a piece of artwork that's often very much symmetrical. It's almost... I don't know that I'm not going to find the right word, but there's the image itself is a very like satisfying, whole and complete and balanced image, and they place it in their prayer spaces. I have one hanging in my office. It's very common. You can find them. I found them in these old stores in Jerusalem, just these little bits of shvitis, and people hang them. You'll see them hanging in synagogues. Sometimes they have them above the ark. And it's an anchor. It's like the lighthouse in the darkness. It's the tether in the storm. I place God before me always. And so just when we're in the storm, when we're in the dark, when the rough waters are upon us and the shore and the rocks might be near, what do we have before us always? Yud He Vav He, God's name. And so this idea of the Shviti is an act of cleaving. And again, it brings up that question, what is it for us in our lives that holds us? So another piece to add to all the things that we've named so far is love, right? Deep love. And knowing love, having been loved, the love of a parent, the love of a beloved friend, the love of a partner, the love of a child, the love of a pet. But love can be one of the ways we find God. Oh, I think in the interest of time, I'm going to let you read this wonderful quote by Maimonides at home as you stay up later tonight studying. But basically, my Rambam, Maimonides, is saying that what we are to do with our lives at all times is Shiviti Adonai lenegdi tamid. We must put God before us always. So we can think about and continue to think about and spend the Shavuot thinking about how might we do this? Where might we find God before us? Or how might we shift things or cleave differently? And just as we all have named, another way to find God that I was going to say, but you all brought it up, was in nature. Right, and so it's in the original quotes in Torah that God is in nature. God, this happened on a mountaintop. And so going up mountains tomorrow, for example, is a way that we might encounter God. Mm-hmm. And I sort of wanted to know see if I could find any other bits of wisdom from the sages about ascending mountains and how that might connect to all of this and how it might be a good thing besides the fact that Torah was received on top of a mountain. And Maimonides came through with this one. He writes, a Jew must realize that his advance in holy matters resembles the climbing of a mountain. When ascending a mountain, it is difficult to remain in one position. One must either climb further upward or descend. Similarly, a Jew must always strive to advance in his spiritual service. Otherwise, he is likely to fall to a lower level. And so I invite you all to climb a mountain with me tomorrow to see if we might ascend spiritually through the world of Asiya with our bodies in the physical world that can ripple into all the other worlds. And we might just find other ways to connect. So tomorrow, 10:30, we're meeting here to caravan up or carpool up to Grizzly Peak, or if you already live halfway up there, you could even meet us at the trailhead. We could find you if you want. Or actually, it's kind of a different way. But anyway, we will find you if you are interested and can come. And final blessing, may we continue to be in conversation with the wisdom of our teachings that invite us how to explore how we focus in our lives, how we're inspired, how we choose the path of life, the path of loving and of meaningful connection. Hag Sameach.
Hag Sameach.
Amen, Rabbi Julie. Amen.
So, gonna sing Shiviti. The words here are on the song sheet. Shiviti Adonai lenegdi tamid. But there's this other word for Adonai, the mixing up of the letters, Havaya, which is a feminine word that means presence. Yud He Vav He, that name for God, that mysterious name, is like the kind of can be translated as is, was, and will be. It is this masterful, amazing, multi-conjugated way of saying the verb to be. So ultimately, the word Yud He Vav He means presence, and Havaya is the word for presence. So Shiviti Havaya, I place presence, awareness, awakeness before me always. Havaya, Ahava, love. We could interchange those, and it goes like this. Shiviti Havaya Lenegdi Tamid Shiviti Havaya Lenegdi Tamid Havaya. You can repeat after me. Havaya, Havaya,
Havaya,
Havaya, Ahava,
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 Ahava, Sheviti, Havaya, Lenegdi, Tamid. So with that, I invite us to bring our presence and our loving appreciation to our storyteller, our Magid Marty Tobin, for a Shavuot story.
Thank you, Rabbi Julie.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Rabbi Julie. Can you hear me okay? I don't know if this is on, Steve. How's this? We're good. Thank you. Shalom, everyone. Nice to be with everyone. Nice to be with people on Zoom. Hag Sameach, Shavuot. I want to say a few words about engaging the Torah this evening. I'm going to start with a prayer that it's an ancient Torah blessing. We don't hear it too often. It goes like this. V'ha'arevna Adonai Eloheinu devrei et Toratecha bifinu fi amacha beit Yisrael. V'nihiyeh anachnu v'tze'etzaenu v'tze'etzaenu kulano yodai shemecha lomdai Toratecha lishma. Baruch atah Adonai Hamlama'ed Torah la'amo Yisrael. May the words of Torah be sweet in our mouths and the mouths of our children and our grandchildren. May we all come to know your name, to study your Torah for her own sake. Blessed art you, Yud He Vav He, who teaches Torah to your people Israel. So the rabbis tell us that this ancient prayer came about as it followed because our ancestors, by accepting the path of God and accepting the Torah, that the words of Torah would always be sweet in their mouths and the mouths of their offspring. So once there lived a chazante named Rivka. She had a voice like the clear round sound of a rosewood flute. When Rivka sang, the congregation felt uplifted by the prayers. And when she chanted her kavanah, her heart's intention, caused the words to rise to the heavens. It happened once on the morning of Shabbat as Rivka held the Torah scroll in her arms, carrying it through the congregation and singing. Her voice rose steadily, more sweetly, and the words brought new meanings to the congregation as if each person were hearing them for the very first time. Up in heaven, the story goes, the Holy One was listening to the singing of the Jewish people in congregations throughout the world. Yet one voice topped the rest, a voice filled with such love and sincerity that every word echoed the Holy One's name. "What voice is this that rings so true?" asked the Holy One of the angels. Ah, it is the voice of Rivka the Chazante, who sings with all her heart, all her soul, and all her might, came the reply. Far below, Rivka was concentrating so hard on what she was singing that when she lifted the Torah scroll above her head, she works out at the gym. It felt like the heavy scroll had no weight at all. Suddenly the Torah began to rise, taking Rivka with it. Her feet left the floor, and still the scroll would not let loose. Instead, it carried her ever upward. The awestruck Rivka soon stood before the heavenly throne and heard the voice of the Holy One. Rivka, the voice said, tell now the secret of your wondrous prayer. How is it that your words have the power to reach my very throne? Rivka bowed low and replied, when I sing, I see the words before my eyes. I feel the words in my throat. I hear the words in my ears. I taste the words in my mouth. And I try with all my heart to understand what I sing. And the voice of the Holy One said, that is true, Kavanah. It has lifted you and your prayers to the heavens. Rivka then looked about, and lo, she was in her congregation. The scroll was still in her arms. The people seemed to have noticed nothing, yet she had flown to heaven, Rivka knew. So she thanked the Holy One. In the words of the Bible, Eternal One, you are near to all who call upon you, to all who call upon you in truth. And the Chazante's eyes shone with joy. So with what kavanah do we receive and accept Torah, not only on Shavuot, but each day as the Torah is constantly being given to us? Having spent the last 49 days counting the Omer, as cousin Randall told us, our sages tell us that we have been rectifying the 49 emotions of our hearts to enable us to come to the Sinai moment when we say, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will understand, accepting the words of Torah and challenging ourselves to make their metaphors relevant to our lives. What do we actually choose when we say those words? As we all know, the central tenet of the Torah is v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, to love our neighbor as ourselves, and all the remainder stems out from that. Rabbi Ira Stone of the Center for Contemporary Musar, reflecting the teachings of the great Musar Rabbi Simcha Zissel and the French Musar philosopher Emmanuel Levinas, comments that in accepting the Torah at Sinai, we have been freed from the metaphor of the slavery of Pharaoh and all the false idols and oppression that represents. But now we're actively choosing with our newfound freedom the yoke of responsibility to care for the other, the commandment to love our neighbor as ourselves, to bear the burden of the other, to care for each other, and the responsibility and challenge that goes with that, while still honoring and caring for ourselves. We are constantly reconciling that in our lives as the Torah always asks that of us each day. So where does kavanah come in? The yoke of responsibility we are choosing, I believe, is relationship with each other, with God, Torah, our self-reflection. That's where God enters our world, our experience. And what underlies this kavanah, or our intent, is our authenticity and our vulnerability. Na'aseh v'nishma is unconditional. We don't necessarily have or predetermination of what the outcome of any such relationship may be. We enter into it, hopefully, with an open heart, with curiosity and willingness to care about and truly meet our neighbors, the others in our lives, and take responsibility for the consequences of the relationship. According to the poet David White, vulnerability is true enlightenment. When we allow ourselves to grapple with the teachings of Torah, we make the words truly sweet in our mouths. And just maybe we too can be like Chazante Rivka, where kavanah, our heart's intention, our vulnerability, guides us, lifts us, connects us to ourselves, each other, our neighbors, and the divine. Hag Shavuot Sameach.
Amen.
Yasher koach. So let us lift up the kavanah of loving our neighbor as ourselves. These words from Leviticus that, yes, indeed, some of the greatest rabbis of all time say is the essence of Torah. Hareini mekabel alai et mitzvat haboreh ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha l'reacha kamocha hareini mekabel alai et mitzvat haboreh ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha l'reacha kamocha. Here we are, prepared to take upon ourselves the commandment of the Creator, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So I now, with joy and gratitude, invite up Emily Simon to bring us into the joys and wonders of the Book of Ruth, which hopefully you all have a copy of.
I'm going to go totally off script. I've never done that before. And I'm going to ask everybody why there are 2 days of Shavuot. Okay? Anybody have a thought as to why there's 2 days of Shavuot? Because one wouldn't be enough, says Shasa Moretsky. Anybody have another thought as to why that is? It's because we've been up all night on the first night. So there is this teaching that says we were up all night on the first night studying. So what happened on the first morning of Shavuot? We slept through getting the Torah. So the fact that we are running perhaps a little late into the night is a long and cherished tradition for Tikkun Leil Shavuot. But with that in mind, and understanding the late hour, particularly for many of us, I am planning to do this as just a little tiny shtekel of the Book of Ruth. Let's call it Ruth Light, all right? And the reason for why is because at my Torah study on Shabbos morning, starting at 9 o'clock, I'm really going to try and do the Book of Ruth in all of her fullness, because I right now am lucky in that, sort of like Marty, I get to talk about the humans, right? I get to do either the opera or the Broadway production of this, and I still really wonder why, if we've got Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat, we don't have Ruth the raucous Ashet Chayil. I mean, we are missing something, and I plan to write it for Andrew Lloyd Webber. I wonder if he will accept my gift to him. So, what do we know about the Book of Ruth? All right, and I'm going to try to do this in 3 sentences, just so that we can have a little bit of discussion about maybe one little part, okay? So we know that Ruth is a Moabite-ess. She's a Moabite, okay? Ruth, who's a Moabite, it's mentioned actually in the Book of Ruth 14 times that she's a Moabite, 9 times her name, and 1 time that she's an Ashet Chayil, that she's a woman of valor. So the fact that she's a Moabite must be pretty important. Now, where do we come in to the Book of Ruth? How do we even meet Ruth? Okay. Her mother-in-law, Naomi, okay, is left bereft when the husband, whose name is Elimelech, goes to Moab during a famine in the land of Judah and winds up staying there a little bit too long because his 2 sons marry Moabite women, okay? And then the 2 sons die. Okay? Elimelech dies, okay? And the 2 sons die. And Ruth is left bereft. That's how, Naomi is left bereft, okay? And Ruth and Ophrah, who is the other surviving daughters of her daughter-in-laws, the 3 women, and notice I'm saying women here, are bereft, okay? And I imagine Ruth as a soprano and the 2 as a soprano, Naomi as an alto, and as Ophrah as a contra-soprano because she leaves pretty soon. You can tell that I am fairly serious on writing my opera about this, and that I have already given musical sort of renditions for many of the characters. So they are in Moab, and they determine that what they need to do to survive is to go back to Judah, back to the land of Judah. They actually go back to Beit Lechem. Okay? And what they decide that they're really going to need to do, having no other means of getting food, is to essentially glean in the fields. Right? So today we would view that as they are immigrants or refugees who are going to a giant soup kitchen, except in this case, it's a grain kitchen, okay? That is the beginning of the book of Ruth, and I have just done, I would say, almost the first chapter in about 2.5 minutes. Now, the famous verses in this book are when Naomi says to both of her daughter-in-laws, go back there, get yourself a new husband, don't come with me, I don't know what is going to happen to me, you need to go back so that you can live. And Ruth says famously, and I'm sorry, I'm quoting from the Stone, not from the JTS, do not urge me to leave you, to turn back and not follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people are my people, and your God is my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may Hashem do to me, and more, if anything but death separates me from you. Okay. Anybody? To get us to the next part of this small teaching that I am going to be doing, what is so astounding about what she is saying? Okay, does anybody want to take that? Here, Rabbi, I'll give you this so you can pass these around. In case anybody wants to take that, and then I will answer it. Esther.
She's looking at her mother-in-law who now that her husband is dead, there's no blood connection between them, and she's saying, no, I've come to love you, and even if you don't want me to love you, I'm going to love you because you're a bigger part of who I am than literally everything I've known for my entire life growing up. And so I'm going to stop being a Moabite. I'm going to stop worshiping Chemosh. I'm going to stop doing all of that because I want to be wherever you are, Naomi.
Okay, superb. Yasher Koch. Anybody else want to say anything that they feel that Esther has not covered at this point? And is there anybody on Zoom?
Emily, this is Dana.
Dana?
Hi, Emily.
Hello, Dana. Good evening.
I think to just continue with that, not only is she committing herself to her ex-mother-in-law, former mother-in-law, whatever, but she is also saying, I'm going to give up the rest of my life to be with you. She is devoting her her married life, her ability to have children, all of which is like the most important thing. She's giving all that up to be with Naomi.
Great. Who does this remind you of? Again, what great patriarch that starts our lives out as Jews does this remind you of? Abraham, right? Abraham leaves everything that he knows, okay, and goes to a world with people he doesn't know, right? Okay. The other thing about this that is astounding is these words are delivered by a non-Jew, okay, and these words are delivered by a Moabite. Okay, remember the 14 times Moabite is referenced? Okay, and the significance of it being spoken by a Moabite and them being in Moab is that we are told in a part of the Torah, which is why the book of Ruth, I say, is so astounding, is that we are told that we are not supposed to marry or intermingle with the Moabites for 10 generations. Okay. And why is that? Because the Moabites were not kind to us when we were leaving Egypt. So, the other thing that we know about the Moabites is from Balak and Balaam, right? And Balak and Balaam, who was very busy cursing us, it's the king of the Moabites. So the fact that a Moabite is saying this at this point, that I want to be with you, I would say in typical women's fashion, okay, we go back to Avraham Avinu, and a woman comes along and takes a kernel of wisdom, spins it around, and elevates it to the next level. And saying, that's maybe what was said before, but I don't have to exemplify that. I can take that out further. I can show that, to use I don't think reconstructionist phrase, I think I think maybe any of the categories that Rabbi Benioff came up with before when she was talking about our ways of worshiping or our ways of viewing God. But I think that what's happening here is that Ruth, I actually, at one point in my opera, I call her Ruth the Reconstructionist. Because I think that what Ruth here is saying is, that's an old way to look at this. And maybe that way of saying that Moabites, we are not supposed to be with Moabites, maybe that's something we need to leave behind. And maybe when God is giving us the Torah, and I would point out that there's nothing in the text of the Torah, this goes back a little bit to what Randall was talking about, that says that this is the holiday in which we were given the Torah, right? This is the holiday for first fruits. This is the holiday where we march to Jerusalem and have a pilgrimage festival. This is a holiday whose roots are actually either agricultural, or if you want to go one step back further, whose roots are pagan. Okay? But we have taken this holiday and said, and you could say the Rebbeim didn't know what else to do, so they scratched their heads, and they came up with, I know, let's say this is the day that we got the Torah. Okay, and then what's the Torah reading for today? Okay, it's a reading about sacrifice. There's not a human in it. So who do we get to have instead? We get to have a woman. So standing up here as a woman, okay, as well as many other qualities that I have and many other minorities that I embrace, this is a day that we get to celebrate women, and the fact that it happens to be the day that we get the Torah, even more to the point. But this here is Ruth, and we even see this in the very first line. When a man goes from Bethlehem in Judah to sojourn in the fields of Moab, okay? And that means that this is Ruth coming back, turning things on its head, sort of like the way in which, you know, there's that teaching that when we got the Torah on Mount Sinai, which you can believe is on Shavuot or any other time you want to believe it, that God held the mountain above us, right? Completely turned everything upside down. And while we were standing there looking up at this mountain that's above us, or perhaps it does do all of the things that Rabbi Benioff was talking about before, that we look up and we see the earth and the sky and the heavens suspended above us. And God looks down at us and says, so you want the Torah? Because if you don't want the Torah, right? Okay. And some people would say that's what we call in the legal business a contract of adhesion, right? It means what's your choice? You got to say yes. It's sort of like compulsory volunteerism, which is the greatest oxymoron I've ever heard, right? You've got to accept it. And this is Ruth coming forward and saying, okay, I'll take it, but I'm gonna change it. So what I will go further into, although I'm certainly welcome to engage in some conversation before most of you in this room drink milkshakes, I will go further into the text on Shabbos morning, and I will talk about if Ruth is the Eshet Chayil in this story, how do we see Boaz? All right, now let's remember, Boaz is the one whose field she's gleaning on, who comes in later and becomes, in the words of the text, not an Ish Chayil, which is an important distinction, but a Gibor Chayil, a strong one, okay? So I will talk more about the other character, who is going to be a baritone, who is Boaz, and about the potential actions of the chorus, who is the gleaners, and then I would say the individuals who are the swings and who are, which is a dance term for people who have special soloists, and the soloist chorus, who I would say are the 10 men at the gate when Boaz, in fact, is a redeemer. And I'm going to talk about what a redeemer is, about levirate marriage, and about the requirements of gleaning and what it has to do with the book of Ruth. But before we get into all of those incredibly scholarly and lengthy exegeses, how I wanted to end this and then welcome other comments about is why Ruth now, why Ruth at Shavuot, and this is for extra bonus points and to come back next year at Purim, okay? What do Ruth and Esther have in common? You can all think about that. Tell me Saturday morning, or if you need to, tell me now. Or if you're too tired, I totally get it, and my feelings won't be in the least bit hurt. I just hope I get to see you on Saturday morning. Anybody have comments, questions, criticisms, thoughts, want to recite a poem? Randall, let's give Randall a microphone because of the people on, oh, Randall, I see you've never met a mic you didn't like. Go for it.
I think that in the spirit of devakut that the rabbi was talking about this evening, that Ruth absolutely cleaves to Naomi for the purpose or with the underlying energy being love, like total love. And I think in that sense, she embodies, and I would suspect that God is there in that union between these two women. And so I think it's profound in its embodying that cleaving that we aspire to.
I also think, Randall, that the love between the two women is so great, okay, that our normal way in which we are, humans in general, are very risk averse. In fact, the only people who are more risk averse than humans are lawyers. Okay? We don't like, and I'm not saying this as a lawyer, I'm saying it as a human, we don't like to take risks. And what is when we do risk reward in our own heads, and we do it and I'm not talking about a thrill-seeking risk. I'm not talking about adolescent risk or climbing a mountain risk. I'm talking about the kind of risk where we make choices in our lives. And when do we make those kinds of choices that take us further along a path, one might say a more risky path, than many of our friends, relations, and families think is a good choice for us? It's when we're in love.
When we're in love.
Right. Thank you, Dana. Was that a chorus of that, Dana?
Yeah, we were in a chorus right then.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
It's when you're in love. That's when you do that. And here, Ruth, one would say what she's doing, and she does it over and over again, right? First she goes and gleans, okay, and leaves her mother-in-law safe. In fact, she almost pre-boards with the gleaning. She goes first and sees if she can glean, okay? When there's no pre-boarding that you can read in here that says there's a method to do that, okay? She goes first. All right. Then what she does to protect her mother-in-law, to protect Naomi. Okay. Then what she does after that is she goes to the threshing floor where Boaz is, okay? All things that could be very dangerous for her and very risky. But what she does is she suspends that rationality for love. And we see her doing that over and over again. And because we see her doing that, and we see her as a person of love, I think it makes it much easier to learn and accept the mitzvot that I will talk more about on Saturday, that are contained within the book of Ruth, than potentially if we were hearing them from another character in the opera. I don't think that we could absorb this in the same way if it came from Boaz, for example. Just saying. Okay, anybody else have something they feel like they need to say esta noche? Carol, and you may need a microphone because of the people on Zoom.
May I try to establish a connection between Esther and Ruth?
Yes. Yes, you're ready to jump ahead, Carol, please.
Well, both of them married outside of their culture, and both of them are looking ahead to extending their lineage, because Ruth is in the line of David, and Esther is thinking about her people, and she marries a foreign king for the sake of her people. So I think there's that connection.
Okay, thank you, Carol. So Carol brings up a connection, and then, as I said, hopefully we'll get a little chance to talk more about this on Saturday. So not only are the Megillot, okay, in terms of the 5 sort of like extra books that somehow make it into the Tanakh, okay, 2 of the 5 are about women that we don't otherwise get to read about, okay? And these 2 of the 5 are the central characters for what has now become a major holiday for Shavuot, and for Purim, which has also become a major holiday. So in the Orthodox world, I should tell you that these two holidays, there are more bat mitzvot on these two holidays, on Purim and on Shavuot, than the rest of the year put together. And it's a celebration of women. And that's why I'm so delighted to do this. And thank you, Rabbi. I hope to see you all on Shabbos morning, where hopefully we will be just like the Israelites when they actually received the Torah that second morning, because of having been up all night the night before. And they are up and at 'em with not only little bushy squirrel tails, but with eyes all bright with wonder. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach. Emily? Emily?
Yes.
It's Dana.
Oh,
You
Dana.
you
Yes.
you need to turn this into a rap, not an opera, and you need to propose it to Lin-Manuel Miranda.
I'll do a rap right now about Ruth. It'll be a rap on Ruth, and that's the truth, because I've never done this at all before, and I'm making it up, but it's here for the door. And we're going towards the door because it's time to leave, so I wish you all good night in the holiday of sheaves.
That was amazing. Absolutely amazing.
You rock.
You totally rock. Thank you, Emily. I know. So much gratitude to our teachers, Cantor Randall, Magid Marty, dear Emily. Thank you so much for teaching to us today. Thank you to all who attended in person and on Zoom. Thank you, Steve, for all your magic back there and always. And may all of these teachings tonight be a part of a radical encounter and immersion with however we might define God. And that definition of God can be so many things. Maybe it's Havaya, presence, or Ahava, that deep love we see in Ruth and Naomi, Ahava. In possibility, in meaning, in ascension, in song, prayer, in the mystical realms, in clinging to those things that are right and true and deeply good. We're going to end tonight with a song about Ruth and Naomi that is an interpretation written by my good friend and classmate from rabbinical school, Rabbi Hannah Spiro. And after that, we will have milkshakes for those who would like to partake. And just to know before the song, so tomorrow, 10:30, meeting here for Hike Up the Mountain at Grizzly Peak. There's information and multiple mailings. And on Saturday morning, an amazing, very exciting Torah study awaits us at 9. Both live and on Zoom, a hybrid.
Congregation Havara Shalom in Portland and Congregation Shalom in New York.
With two other congregations, Congregation Shalom in New York and Havara Shalom in Portland will also be attending the Torah study. And thank you for your leadership on that. Then we will have a Shabbat morning service with the melodies of the festival with Cantor Randall's help and singing Hallel. We will also have Yisker, our memorial service. And after that service, we will have a potluck oneg that is also sponsored by our social committee, full of blintzes and kugels and cheesecakes, I hope, cheese, which is something we didn't talk about today, but is the traditional food of Shavuot. So without further ado, this song, it's called Wherever You Go by Rabbi Hannah Spiro and Ruth and Naomi.
And she said, don't should go. I'm dragging you down, and you of all people should know. She said that I could and I should be starting off fresh with someone who has more to give me. But she has provided me with a place where I feel loved and understood and safe and free. She needs help, she's poor and weak, but that's all the more reason to stay with the woman who loves me. So I said, wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord deal with me severely, if anything but death parts you and me. She asked, how are we going to eat? I don't see how we can stand on our own 2 feet. So I said, I'll just go to the fields to get the fruit where no one else is going to go. And so the very next morning, I stared out into a tree, and I knew that what it grew would be enough for her and me. 'Cause we are not too hungry. It fills you up to know that there's someone who loves you deeply. So we're okay. And if you think that I'm a fool, next time you're lonely, I'm pretty sure that you'll agree that life alongside someone that you trust makes the queen's jewels look like diamond dust. And that's why I tell her, wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord deal with me severely, if anything but death parts you and me. And wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord deal with me severely, if anything but death parts you and me.
Sameach, everyone. Thank you.
Xamea.